day to you. This is Anna Galactic bringing you another science presentation in astronomy, which is in a class by itself. The earth sciences are for Earth, the metaphysical sciences are for metaphysics, but astronomy is a single surface. It certainly isn't the Earth, it's everything else. We can't really touch it, but we have gotten to the moon. Now today, we're going to start at the moon in order to recount the history of science, which is very simple. It should be simple. That's what science is all about, is to bring understanding. It's not to bring paradoxes, although we encounter paradoxes. And it's not to get right to the answer because the universe is pretty darn big. And so we do develop theories in order to account for what we haven't quite figured out, but we may have a guess. And that's okay. But in science, you have to be extremely serious about what is true and proved, those are synonymous, and what is guessed at, which is a theoretical basis, which is always there. And now, of course, it's the fave rave. The maximum excitement has been reached. The human race has achieved a technological level where we now have telescopes and spectroscopes I have called them, although I'm not sure that's actually a word, to take measurements on light readings from distant stars and objects. Yesterday, we began a special series. Today is the second presentation in rather lengthened lectures. Yesterday's lecture was 2 hours long. What we covered in that lecture is worth recounting just to be sure. Now, if you haven't seen that lecture, and perhaps you're daunted by 2 hours, because after all, who am I? I'm not exactly Leonard Susskind or Larry Krauss. I'm not a professor, and I'm not a physicist. So why 2 hours? It's for laymen. 99% of all scientists are laymen. In other words, we don't get paid for it. Now today, I'm going to attempt to fulfill my promises from yesterday because there's a lot to cover. Oh, pardon me, I shouldn't have done that. Let me put that back. I hope that restores it. Okay, good. I want to show you where we left off yesterday. Don't worry if you did not see that 2-hour lecture, which is, by my standards, twice as long as a lecture should be. 40 minutes is about right, but I have produced, to date, 339 lectures on cosmology, astronomy, and science in general, going all the way to the number system that we use, calculus, algebra. But what we really do here is geometry. That is the nature of the science that I pursue, which is an orientation. Because when you say you're doing geometry, well, are you using numbers? We really always use numbers, but we do need to know how we use numbers. Numbers are extraordinarily closely related to geometry. Today, I'm going to go into what you see highlighted here, and I'm giving it some extra highlight. 0 to infinity. This is a summarization and a continuation of previous lectures that I've given on the numbers that we use in science. Astrophysics and quantum mechanics, the two cutting edges of science from a geometric point of view, that is going in and going out. These two sciences are both the cutting edge, as it's called. I prefer the Fermi edge, since we are now talking about a spherical orientation, and a bubble surface edge is more appropriate than a knife edge. A knife edge you could think of as the straight line, but the Fermi edge is a bubble. And that's appropriate. We live in a bubble. Our heliosphere is a bubble in intergalactic space, or you could say, I'm sorry, not intergalactic, intragalactic, inside of a galaxy. What we normally say in that situation, interstellar space. And for you science fiction buffs, you may get a little goosebumps on your arm. Interstellar, ha ha ha. That movie, by the way, is crap. Okay. Interstellar, if you haven't seen it, don't. It has been analyzed by some cosmologists who are quite unhappy with the portrait of the black hole, although the population that watched Interstellar loved it. My family came to me saying that they finally had something they could share with me, since none of them care about astronomy or really science at all. But they came running to me saying, "Oh, Interstellar, Interstellar, you've got to see it." I already was trying to avoid it. I knew what it would be like. They were saying, "Oh, you're going to see what's really in outer space that's really exciting." And what they had when they went by the black hole, so-called, was artists' renderings elevated to the level of imagery in a movie, which is so unscientific that it can only be called desultory from the point of view of a scientist. Now, what we're trying to do is get out here. We did that yesterday. These are interacting bar spiral galaxies. But today we want to take the other tack, and we're going to start with this, the moon. We're going to start where we all start. And on our little outline here, where we're at is here. 0 to infinity. I promised that I would cover that. Yesterday we covered all of this down to the cosmic units, but we ran to 2 hours as I am seeking to summarize the information that I have put together to give us understanding as laymen for what's actually been discovered in astronomy in the past century. Quite a bit, one would have to say. How much do you know about it? Well, I can tell you this, we're all beginners here. All the PhDs, Nobel Prize laureates, everybody who says that they look through the telescopes and they are figuring out macroscale structure. Simultaneously, we're going in and penetrating quantum space. So we're going in and still looking in to try to find the center of anything. This would be what the Greeks called an atom. We're going to be covering that in a geometric fashion, very simply, very directly. We begin here. Today, 0 to infinity. Don't let that daunt you. There's nothing threatening here, because a real scientist, a real presenter, one who interprets science for the layman when it's not quite clear what the experts are actually saying, remember this, that the experts do not any better understand the universe than you do. The only way you can understand the universe so that it actually matters, that is, it makes sense realistically, is if it changes your life, if it changes you. Why do we do science? Today, I'm going to help you and myself and anybody who cares to regain the high ground that you once knew. When you first looked at this, you experienced a sense of wonder. Now, later in life, you may have seen something like this and experienced that wonder again. Here, I would like to just quickly show you a quote. To introduce our lesson in geometry, we're going to relearn geometry the easy way, the way it could have been taught to us in school, but was not. Geometry was not taught to us the way I'm going to teach it to you now. Although nothing that you hear will be unfamiliar, I'm going to put it together for you in a most meaningful way. This is called synthetic science. It's a phase of science for the purpose of understanding, which is the goal. Although there's always a goal beyond the goal, that has to do with wisdom, and that pertains to you alone. It's for your answers. Nobody knows what your questions or needs are. In science, we can find assistance in getting the answers to our questions as individuals. In order to do that, we have to know what science knows. This is a quote from Fritz Zwicky that you see on the screen. To eliminate the discrepancy between men's plans and the results achieved, a new approach is necessary. That might not make sense because there's a context here. What Fritz is talking about in the discrepancy between men's plans and the results achieved, men's plans are what I was just talking about, what humans want, and the results achieved, how has science contributed to the human equation, either for an individual or for humanity as a whole. We know the advantages of technology. What about the real side, the actual side, what science is really for in the long run, for a real human who wants to be a real human? This is a decision that every human makes. You would not be watching this channel right now unless you had already made a decision in the direction of astronomy. You've already committed to rational logic, and now you're looking for rational logic in the form of knowledge and understanding about some scientific province, of which there are the earth sciences, biology, chemistry, geology. You can go all the way to psychology, which is an inexact science. You can go to history, another inexact science. Or you can study mathematics, which is sometimes called pure science. What it is pure abstract logic. We're going to cover that today so that you will remember everything that you were taught, but it will make sense in a new way, which is what Fritz is talking about here. So let me finish this quote, and then we're going to begin Zero to Infinity. A geometric approach to modern astrophysics so that a layman, a human of any age, in the age of reason, you have to be a certain age, at least mentally, but it's not calculus, it's not calculus, it's not models, it's not theories, it's not complexity and complication. It's what we actually know. That's what a layman wants. Okay. To eliminate the discrepancy between men's plans and the results achieved, a new approach is necessary. Morphological thinking suggests, let me put in a quick aside, morphological, think of that as geometrical. They're extremely closely related. I'm a morphologist. It's not the name of a branch science that you hear very often, but it is real. And now it's becoming critically important in physics to adopt this new approach. I represent the solution approach. And I'm going to prove it to you by the end of this lecture, which will probably be on the order of 2 hours. And I have plenty of soda. Yesterday, I had to get up and replenish my soda supply twice. I drank 3 full sodas. This holds 2. All right. Morphological thinking, that is geometric thinking, suggests that this new approach cannot be realized through increased teaching of specialized knowledge. For that, read calculus. Calculus is the enemy of geometry. Calculus does not belong in basic science. Calculus is a highly specific tool for industry, for use in technology. It's almost useless in deep space science, and it's proved to be paradoxically limited in quantum mechanics. I have determined the source of the problem, both for cosmology and for quantum mechanics. It's our number system has failed. You're going to know that by the end of this lecture. So the increased teaching of calculus is ineffective to break the logjam. We don't need more mathematics. Mathematics has failed. Now, it's failed to a threshold. It hasn't ultimately failed because calculus produces technology. That is what it's for. But because it's so successful, it's also being used in Fermi edge physics, which now has reached two limits, which you and I are going to explore from the point of view of the past in our own lives when we encountered physical infinity. What I'm going to get us to now is the image that I want to remain on the screen until we show a few more images of some of the cosmic units. I will get to that because I promised I would show you a quasar and a double-lobed radioactive galactic nucleus. I also promised to discuss the highly touted accretion disk model of the quasar, which is taught in all the universities now, and it is inaccurate. The accretion disk that is associated with a supermassive black hole has never actually been verified. And it's not a problem whether the supermassive black hole has an accretion disk or not. It might. But it's the way that that accretion disk is made into part of a model for what the quasar is. And that is woefully inaccurate. And it needs to be corrected because the quasar is extremely important in understanding the universe. We covered that yesterday. If that tantalizes you, like perhaps you would like to know more, then you might want to look at yesterday's lecture, a 2-hour lecture, mostly devoted to the cosmic units. I will get around to that later, but for now, I want to fulfill my promise to begin with where we all began, which is in two senses. You remember back in school, in grade school, being taught mathematics. We're going to go into that, but what's more important, remember that you were taught geometry. Now, geometry is for visualization. And so 0 to infinity is what I'm going to embark on now. The title, 0 to infinity, we're actually referring to geometry, not so much numbers. Although I will show you the relationship between the two, which is not ever taught. The specific relationship between mathematics and geometry, in my considered opinion, and in the opinion obviously of Fritz Zwicky, is that that takes precedence. So let's finish this quote. That is, geometry takes precedence. And here's how Fritz phrases that. Morphological thinking, that is geometric thinking, the geometric approach which we adopt here, suggests that the new approach to break the logjam in physics cannot be realized through increased calculus, through increased mathematical tools, through the increased teaching of specialized knowledge. That's what Fritz is talking about. And now to finish the quote, this geometric analysis, the proper term is morphological, and I'll be teaching you what that word means. It basically means geometrical. This morphological analysis suggests that the essential fact has been overlooked, that every human is potentially a genius. That's an amazing statement, and Fritz is not alone in thinking that. I totally side with that point of view. You are potentially a genius. That's what Fritz is saying. Every human is potentially a genius. You could actually take that further, but it's well enough said. Education and dissemination of knowledge must assume a form which allows each student to absorb whatever develops his own genius, lest he become frustrated. There's a lot of food for thought there, but we're into astronomy on a specific vector. Pardon me, I do have asthma, but with the soda, I have a scratchy throat, so I'm sorry I coughed there. But I'm not going to be coughing throughout the lecture. Well, let's hope not, or I'll turn it off. Education and dissemination of knowledge must assume a form, that's the form we assume, geometry, which allows each student to absorb whatever develops his own genius, lest he become frustrated. Let me put that positively. Every student is given the freedom to develop his own genius because the form of the teaching encourages that. And when that is done, not only will the student not become frustrated, the student will become a scientist, which is good for all of us. We need more scientists who think rationally and are capable of becoming solution-oriented humans. That is, we want the answers, not the guesses. We don't care about the models. We don't care about the theories. We do in the sense that we need to observe what the theories are, but then we need to take them apart and find out why these scientists are baffled out of their minds. And it's literally true now. They've gone... There are two ways of going where no man has gone before, okay? And one of them is psychotic. And it's far easier to go that way. When you're trying to say what the universe is, you have to be sure of yourself in science. In common conversation, you can guess. In science, you cannot guess. Unless you say every single time that you're guessing that it's a theory. You're allowed to do that. But you must say it's a theory. That rule is no longer followed. So, which is psychotic from a scientific point of view. It's not a psychoanalytical use of the word psychotic. It's a break with reality. And this is the reality that science is enlisted to. We don't like to hear theories stated as facts. That always upsets a scientist. Not anymore. There are two kinds of scientists now. I've covered that, so we're not going to go into that. But I think you understand that astrophysics, with its astrophysical community of astrophysicists, is a human community with competition, struggle for money and survival, for honor and glory, all the human condition elements enter into science now because it's on the internet, because it's disseminated through books, all the way back to the Gutenberg press, 400 years ago, if I'm guessing right. So let's complete this quote and then begin our zero to infinity geometric approach to the universe from the point of view of a child, from the point of view of a human that knows nothing except, we assume, has infinite capacity to understand. We assume that. My job is to make sure that you understand what science knows so that you can use it if you want. But if someone is feeding you stuff that's not true, it's going to mislead you. I will not do that. A real scientist is sworn not to do that. But if you're making a living, you have a divided interest. And I'll say no more on that. The same outlook applies to the genius of the peoples as a whole. What Fritz is saying is that as you enable the individual, you enable science itself. I believe that that's self-evident. Okay, that's a good introduction, I think. So let's begin. 0 to infinity. A geometric approach to the universe, which I developed basically in 2022 and made 300 lectures in that year to document the discovery vector that came to me. That's what this is, but you won't know where the transition point is from what science already knew to what I've added to it. I'm a discoverer now, and in science, a discoverer who has not yet received consensual observation. My theory is unknown, so it has to be called a theory. I just said so because it hasn't been proved. Now, I have proved this new geometry to myself, and that's necessary, but that's not the last step. It's just the first step. It might be invalid, and I have no way of being absolutely sure of that, except as I believe myself. Well, anybody can fall into that trap. No, that's why we have consensuality. It's to safeguard the scientific process so that you don't sneak something in. You're going to find out, if you don't already know, and you should already know, a lot of extremely misleading theories have entered into science at the cosmological level. And I've documented that well enough in the 300 lectures that I've already produced. So there is a serious human side to this. I take this extraordinarily seriously. I always have. And so I am emotionally involved, and it shows, but I've reined it in. But you do need to know that you're in on this too now. Because as you learn the truth about the geometry of the universe, it's going to go against the current paradigm. So you have to be cautious. With me, as well as anybody else. I can say all the things that they say. I could be trying to fleece you, deceive you. I don't think these men are evil, okay? But I don't even want to be part of something that might be deceiving. I'm not here to deceive you. But they say that too. The ones who are deceiving you. And what I'm saying is I'm sure that they believe their theories. That's okay, and we're going to leave it at that. Because that's what the religious prophets have all told us to do about that. If you see what you think is evil, hold off. Hold off. You're offended. You're outraged. I've expressed all of these emotions. You're protective. You think you're righteous. Don't react to evil right away. Don't ever jump at the gun, because evil is everywhere in many forms. And what you see as evil, you might be misperceiving what you see. And so the advice given by Yeshua, the Buddha, and even the prophet, who was not... The prophet is a little different from Yeshua and Buddha, but they're all three say the same thing. Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism all have the same advice from the source, okay, as they see it. When you see evil, don't respond right away. You might have to, but don't try not to respond. Try not to point the finger. Especially going ad hominem. You jerk. You fool. You deceiver. It's not even going to be a matter of being misunderstood at that point. You're calling someone a name. You can end up getting your ass kicked for that. And then talk about it afterwards, after you've been smashed. You don't want to be accusing people of things at all, if you can avoid it. Now, in science, we take great liberties, and I've made the same mistake of pointing the finger. I'm very careful always to say that I'm not impugning the man, but when I use the man's name, and I'm using him as an example of what not to do and why not, that can easily be, it's not even misconstrued. It could easily be taken to the heart, like, you saying that about me? Why, you, and now you have a fight. To whatever degree, I mean, this is how wars start. And the war between Leibniz and Newton is just one more example of a petty war that in science is never appropriate. And I've got to confess, I don't really see any way out of it. You're going to step in it. The more serious you get, the more you're going to find out there is another serious party. For instance, I'll give you an example from when I was growing up in the 1960s. I know, but I am that old, yes. I was just entering high school. I entered high school in 1968. So you do the math, okay? Well, I'm 68 years old, so there. And so what I got involved in right away, right out the gate, the first scientific interest I ever showed, other than for like jets, but not really as a scientist, I just like jets. And rockets. And explosions, all of which you get in cosmology, don't worry. I got my fill now, Daddy-o. But when I was 16 years old, 15 years old, I was taught in biology what we all were taught about biology. And biology, there's lots of things to learn about cells and mitochondria, and, you know, we're taught about DNA, but of course, I mean, this is like 50 years after this, less than 50 years after the Scopes trial, which tried in the United States court, I believe in Tennessee, whether or not it was okay to teach the theory of natural selection in schools. And then the whole thing just blew up into a debate between creationists, which basically is Christians in America. But it's not just Christians, but that's how it got labeled. And was I a Christian? Not at that time. My family is atheist. And so at the time I was not a Christian. I didn't know anything about God. I had never thought about God. I guess you could say I was an agnostic, an existential agnostic. This is important. I do need to say this. You will benefit from what I'm saying, so put up with my little story, and then I swear, we'll talk about this. Now, yesterday we talked about the cosmic units. Oh, mamma mia, you should watch that video. But I'll cover it again today because I promised to show pictures especially the quasars. But to finish my story about natural selection, of course that's what we were taught. But at a time when the Christians were going out of their minds, because what they were saying is that natural selection really isn't very good for the kids. Now, I disagree with that, but the issues really went deep. I think most rational people would have to scratch your head about it, particularly, if you are a religious person. It's like, what are they saying? What are they saying? Well, dear, you're just talking to your wife or something, you're discussing this with the boys. What do you think we should do about this goddamn natural selection bullshit? And we're talking about it. How should we vote? How should we react? Put pressure on the school. Which way? How do we think about natural selection? Well, I think most people today, and I would count myself as one of them, would say, well, it's a theory, and so you should teach it if it's a theory. I don't see any harm in teaching a theory. We teach the Keplerian theory, but we don't believe it. We're not teaching it like, well, you had better believe this now. Kepler says, or not Kepler. Who's the guy that had all the, he's before Tycho, before Kepler. That guy goes way, the guy who wrote the Almagest. What was his name? He's the guy who had epicycles. So, and this was a mathematical and geometric, I'm getting to the point, don't worry. A mathematical and geometric, the hell was his name? I should know his name. I can't believe I'm not remembering his name. I'll bet you've already guessed, though, who I'm talking about. Because the planets going around the sun, they weren't sure that planets really were going around the sun, because it looks like everything goes around the Earth. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And so people were still scratching. This is about 1,000 years ago. Well, how does everything go around the Earth? So, this guy whose name I can't remember, I'm going to kick myself when I remember it. You know what happens? You've been through this. You try and remember the name, and for some reason you're just not remembering the name. And it bugs you. It just bugs the bee-jeepers out of you. But you have to keep going with your story, even though you can't remember a critical name. The guy who wrote the Almagest. The guy who had the epicycles. I'll edit this. All right. So I'm entering high school, and I'm taught natural selection, and I'll tell you the truth. From the very first time they showed me the pictures of the monkeys, it just shows you the amoebas are down here, just one-celled organisms. And then it shows diatoms. They're more complex. They got, then the radiolarians. These are all one-celled. It just goes up and up. This is how life began, with one cell that's just obvious, like they're doing a mathematical sequence. What the fuck do I know? And so, okay, I'm listening, but... And you get up to amphibians, and they just look you right in the eye. I had, teachers just year after year say this. They just look you right in the eye and just absolutely dead serious. And then they turned into amphibians. And I'm like, that's millions. I knew, even as a kid, I think a lot of us did, you went from one cell to millions? I say, well, evolution. Oh, I know, you have to know. And we're like, or I wasn't alone, but there are a few, we talked about this, like, what do you think about that, We're like, we're dubious, man, right from the go. Well, nobody is now, so this is different, so you should know about this. And then, you know how it goes. There's amphibians, okay? They have special kinds of lungs. But you see, they had been fish. So it really goes from amoebas to radiolarians to like algae, which is more complicated. They evolved and discovered light. And I'm going, God, it took us thousands of years, so I guess it could take millions of years for the bacteria to discover light. But they did. So they started using it. Photosynthesis. I'm going, those are some goddamned clever fucking bacteria. I'm thinking, I've never seen a bacteria that looked to me like it could think. It just makes you sick. It gets in your throat. They have to give you penicillin. You don't like it. You're sick. You have to get a shot. Bacteria, they don't seem like they would be looking for light, okay? It's more like they're looking for death. But this is just, a kid, I'm just 14, 15. They tell me year after year, just showing us it's up on the walls, dinosaurs everywhere. Dinosaurs were huge because of this controversy going on that we kids really didn't know about. I didn't. In the Christian families, I found out later in high school, they did know. And it was just as bad, but it was worse. Because that goes against what God says. And they're thumping on the Bible. And I learned about this later, but I did not know it at the time. It's sola scriptura, this is against the way of... And it just goes all over the place. Outrage. All I'm doing is being taught there's amoebas, there's algae, and then there's fish. And they have millions of cells. They have a digestive system, a nervous system. They have a skeletal system. How did the germs think this up? It's not clear how they thought this up, but they did. And they say every time, like a litany, evolution. Then they stare at you. Do you understand? And they test you on it. It's on quizzes. It's so what's after dinosaurs? And then you have to know, it's well, mammoths. That's correct. After dinosaurs came mammoths. And then came they had to explain whales, which even the author of Moby Dick, whose name I'm not even going to try to remember, he had a difficult time. He spent pages talking about whether the whale was a fish. Because the Bible says, so you learn things when you don't know anything. It just comes in these rumors and strange forms. It's I already knew because they had taught me through biological evolution, I guess, that a whale is a mammal. But actually, really. And so they had a theory, well, it was a mammal, but it went back. It went back into the sea. And they look you right in the eye and then they test you on it. So how come whales are mammals? And you'd better know. It's because they had been mammoths. And the mammoths went back and became whales. The mammoths came from the dinosaurs, which are now gone, which needs to be explained. They couldn't explain it. The only explanation that anybody had for why the dinosaurs were gone was in the Bible. And I didn't know that. I did, but I just thought it was in the Bible. Well, I wasn't sure of that either. I'm not sure that's a reliable source. I wasn't judging anything, but you have to. Because now they're going to test you on it. And finally, they just tested us. Is the Bible true or not? And you have to say no, or they flunk you, and then you starve to death. So you have to know the right answer, and they taught you, so you'd better know, is the Bible true or not? They test you on it in high school. And you have to say no. And they're watching you as you say no. I saw a couple of guys just staring over my shoulder and then like backing away when I looked at them, but then getting closer again as I'm answering this question, and they had badges and they had like instruments hanging from their belts. They're very formal and they wore shiny black shoes. But they watched me as like on this question, they just came out of nowhere and they're looking, and they did this with a couple other kids who were also intelligent, as I was. They knew I was different because I wasn't responding right. And so they knew from the past, they knew had all my records, that in the past I would just write, yes, the Bible is true, because you don't know. I just write it in. I'd make a third answer. I'd cross out both of their multiple choice answers, yes and no, and write in my answer, which is you don't even know what you're talking about, so why are you asking me about this shit? They didn't like that. They didn't like that. But I learned, I mean by your senior year, and I did learn, no, they're watching you. So is God your loving Savior? Well, you better. Well, natural selection says no. Natural selection says no, there is no God, therefore no Jesus, no Buddha, there's no hope, and love is something you learned like a bacteria learned. And I'm like, that sounds correct. That actually sounds correct. But I didn't know. And the final question is, are you willing to sell your soul to the devil right now for money? Yes or no? And then below that is a question about, well then, if not, which branch of the service would you like to die in overseas? You're probably not going to be an Air Force pilot because you have to be born, it's genetic. So you're going into the Army and going to Vietnam, just like the other some letter of the alphabet word people. So are you willing to sell your soul right now for money, or would you like to go into religion? So I chose religion and said, fuck the scientists. I hate you all. You do calculus. You're of the devil. You lie, you cheat, you make bombs, you make bullets. You're going to the moon. I hope you don't get there. I prayed that the thing would crash. I hated the Pentagon by then. It just got worse. It's like, you're all scientists? Well, you're the ones who destroyed the Japanese people. As a military mind, I knew why we had it. And of course, actually, I approved of it, just like everyone else did. But I'm ashamed of it now. Just like Feynman, just like Einstein, just like Fermi, just like Oppenheimer. You gotta finally face yourself in the mirror. You fucking killed the Jews, man. I was rooting for Hitler before I really made the connection. You know, you want Hitler to win? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretending like I don't know and reading everything I can about World War II, pretending I don't know the outcome, and I'm fucking betting on Hitler. Because I wanted him, the way he seemed like a nice guy. For Germany, it was a hard time. But then, I mean, I just really wasn't clear about I kept hearing about the Jews. And I did not know what that meant. So it was a real long, long time before I even was interested in science. I never did astronomy, except under the influence of psychedelics. And then it was great. I loved astronomy, but I've never got a telescope because of calculus or mathematics or using a screwdriver. Fuck you all. Because I already knew, you make bombs, you make bullets, you just want to kill. It's the same old story. And you're scientists and you work for the government, you're industrial slaves. And so I'm supposed to, I just want to sign my soul over to you. So I went into the Navy. Because it's a stepladder sequence down. Oh, really? It starts out, you're not going to Stanford. No. But I wanted to yeah, of course, it's the nearest university. I used to ride my bike there. I used to ride to Stanford because I wanted to be there so bad. I just basically hung out there. Eventually got into their stacks, learned some shit in their library, so I got a pass from a junior college. But I didn't make it. Junior college. Well, that's the same thing as technical school. You just weren't smart enough to get into the aristocracy. You're going to have to, there's the shovel. There's more steps going down. How far down do you want to go? Yeah, well, you're not going to Stanford. And I'm like, okay, well, you shoot high. It's American. It's okay, but you're not going to Stanford. What about the Ivy League colleges? There's like a couple of dozen Ivy League, or maybe as far as England, Cambridge, Oxford. It's like, no. Grades, no. Attitude, no. Credentials, desire, no. He just wants to be where there's brick and ivy anywhere. And so, no, that's not enough. He didn't sign over his soul. They know. They are told somehow by your high school. He never really learned. He doesn't think he's from a monkey. He refuses to answer. He doesn't think that bacteria can become so good that they learn how to make light into energy. Well, we're still learning about that now. The bacteria figured out light and how to turn it into energy with their little tiny algae bodies. And then they made rhinoceroses and giraffes and barking seals, and then humans. Really? Oh yeah, that makes sense. You explained it all. What's the mechanism again? Oh! Millions of years. I didn't need to know mathematics to know that was a fucking lie, okay? That's a lie. That's a cop-out. Millions of years and that's your mechanism. Ha 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 ha. You dirty swine. But I wasn't sure what to do next. So I stayed away from science, Daddy-o, until I was in my 50s. I mean, unless you count be a scriptural scholar, a Bible expert who learns Greek just enough to be able to read a lexicon and then learns Hebrew just so he can figure out the tetragrammaton. What? That's not science. Actually, it is, but it's not a precise science. Hog sound, that's good luck. If I make the hog sound laughing, we've learned that that's good luck in our astrology class. Kepler was in it, so I attended, yeah. You can learn a lot from the I Ching, which I know how to pronounce in Chinese. My dad would say to us kids, he said this more than once because he thought it was such a good joke. He did it twice, and then he realized that he had already done it the first one other time, and I caught him on it. I said, Dad, you already told that. He goes, yeah, I'm like, it's okay, Dad. We didn't care. He could still make you laugh the second time. He said, I can speak any language, kids. And we're like, Daddy, whoa, hold on. We're staring, and that means we're staring at him. That's what that stare means. Because we don't know. He's our daddy. Maybe he does. Sounds preposterous. We talked about it later. You weren't. No, I never. I knew he was. I wasn't sure about. None of us saw the joke though, coming. And he said, "I speak every language, except Greek." And of course, you know what happened. It's like just out of a comedy skit that we really just read our lines. I think I was the first. Oh no, it was Lori. Well, I don't. All three of us. Chinese, speak Chinese, Daddy. And I'm like, speak Swahili, Daddy. And Kim's like, speak, whatever she came up with, French. And he stared at us, and we're all like, and he says, it's all Greek to me. And my mother laughed from the kitchen. And so we knew it was a joke. And that's how I learned what a joke is. But that's not really cosmology. We're dealing with high-level cosmology now. And so how did I get into it? Not at age 18. Came later. Oh, well, let me show you. I promised to do this, and now's a good moment. How indeed. I'll show you how indeed. Here it is. Well, that's all of us. That's where we begin today. It's that thing. Now what that is there's some more, but here's the guy. Arp. Dr. Halton Arp. Here's a little better picture of him when he was a younger man. Usually see these guys old. Like this guy, Fritz Vicky. You want to see? That's actually a good portrait right there, but you see there's several portraits here, and this one over here toward the right, I'm not highlighting it, but you can see there's a couple of good ones, and this is the most famous one of Fritz. As I want you to see this a little better, because this is one of the most hated men. He's he's my hero, okay, so I'm not making any bones about it. He's my teacher.